Welcome to Dock Chat, the podcast that brings you the stories of the unique community of people who work, live and play in the historic Dockyard, Chatham. In addition, we'll take a look at exhibitions, events and attractions at the Dockyard. My name is John Robinson, and in this episode we hear from George Hornby, volunteer researcher at the Dockyard. George starts by telling us about his links with the Dockyard and his work as a volunteer researcher.
I first came to this Dockyard, I was age 6, and I was living with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a draftsman here. And I came in to spend days with him, I think so my grandmother could go and do things. And the thing I remember really about it are the huge windows and how much natural light there was in the building, and then these wondrous drawings on the tilted tables. And it was fascinating. My family's next main connection was that in the 1970s, my brother was a shipwright apprentice here. But we go back a long, long way in the Dockyard and the Navy. And most families in the Medway area who've got one connection to the Dockyard will have lots of either known or unknown connections, because that's the way it worked. So mainly there'd be connections at Chatham, which was for a long time the major dockyard in the whole system, the key around which everything turned, and also Sheerness, which is very, very connected here. Lots of other people will have, or lots of the same people will have connections with Deptford and Woolwich dockyards up the Thames, and then along the south coast, places like Portsmouth and Devonport. But it's not just even in this country, because the dockyard system and the personnel, the people, they also sometimes went to work in places like Antigua and Jamaica and Bermuda and Halifax in Canada. And they were all very much integrated into what here at the Dockyard we're trying to tell the story about. And then there's the Mediterranean ones, there's Gibraltar, there's Port Mahon at Minorca. Then there are bases in Ireland. There was Kinsale, and there was Cork, there was Pembroke in Wales. And then in Scotland you've got places like Rosyth and Invergordon. There are many others that, if time allowed, I could mention that were smaller and more temporary, but these are the main places. The Navy couldn't have worked without a dockyard system. There were countries that tried it, and their ships became increasingly unusable and uncompetitive. So we needed bases like Ascension and Cape Town in the South Atlantic, and then in the Indian Ocean there's Mauritius, there's Mumbai, there's Trincomalee, there's Madras, and then in the further east there's Singapore, there's Hong Kong, and then at the other side of the Pacific there's Eskimo. And we borrowed, we had a working relationship at Valparaiso in Chile. So all these families from around this area will also have connections to victualling yards, like there was one at Rochester, there was a major facility at Deal. And then in addition to the things that the government owned, there was lots of work done as part of the dockyard system in private shipyards and in, later on, steelworks and so on, so that there were people from here who went up to Sheffield to check the quality of the steel and things like that. And what I'm trying to say is that dockyards, the key across the history of this historic dockyard to the country being able to have stable, effective power across the world. And they did that also by having cutting-edge science and technology. There was immense skill and adaptability amongst the workforce, and that meant they had to be skilled and educated and work together as teams. And as research volunteers, one of the things we do is to try and explore these questions, but we also get inquiries from the public about great-grandfather, and we try and answer those as well. But in all that we do, we're looking for the big issues, but we're also looking for the interesting human stories. and we get to help with exhibitions. I was asked a decade ago to come into the Dockyard to do 2 hours a week transcribing, and it's virtually full-time occupation now, and it's wonderful being part of this community we have here and understanding how the sort of 450 odd people that are here in the historic Dockyard working in various ways, but they're all part of a bigger community across the area. I think it's fascinating and very satisfying, and can warmly recommend people coming here because it's a great place to be.
We will hear more from George later. Interested in finding out more about visiting the Dockyard? Then the website is easily accessible by typing Historic Dockyard Chatham in your browser, or if you want the website address, it is thedockyard.co.uk. That is thedockyard.co.uk. You will be able to buy tickets online, and the great thing is the cost of a ticket gives you access to the Dockyard for a year. We also have 2 special summer offers. You can become a Dockyard detective in A Game Is Afoot and solve the clues. This is a family activity, and entry is included in the price of your ticket. In addition, there is 1 free child ticket for every full-paying adult. Hurry, these special offers are only available until the 1st of September. For full details, please visit our website. 2024 is the 200th anniversary of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and this is being celebrated at the Dockyard with an excellent temporary exhibition in the newly refurbished No. 1 Smithery. RNLI 200, the exhibition, is open till the 1st of September. There is also a permanent exhibition on the site of the UK's largest collection of historic lifeboats. The very popular Salute to the 40s weekend is returning to the Dockyard over the weekend of the 14th and 15th of September. Join us for the most spectacular time-travelling vintage festival of the year and enjoy a weekend filled with nostalgia, laughter and a whole lot of fun for the entire family. This is a separately ticketed event. Here is more from George Hornby as he tells us a fascinating story about HMS Victory and ancestry.
A little known story here in the Dockyard that deserves to be better known, and you can discover it when you go to the Plan Your Visit desk at the start of a visit here, and you can ask the people, can I have a little look at the HMS Victory model? And it's only a few yards down from there, and it's the biggest model we have. It's enormous, 24, 30 feet, something like that long, and it's big enough that it used to operate with 2 men inside it, and they'd open the gun flaps and make cannon fire out of it. And this was built in 1941 for a film called That Hamilton Woman, which was made by Alexander Korda, who's a Hungarian refugee who became British, and he had a British team in Hollywood in 1941. At that stage, the Americans weren't in the war, but we were, and he wanted a story that would help whip up support internationally for the plucky, extended, international British community that was resisting European dictators. It's also a love story about Emma Hamilton and Horatio Nelson, and those 2 were played by Vivian Leigh and Laurence Olivier. As a sort of side note, really, one of the 2 screenwriters on this film was R.C. Sheriff, who's really well known for his play Journey's End, which came out in 1928, and it's the best play there's ever been about life on the Western Front during the First World War, so down in the dugouts, and it's subtle, influential, it's really powerful. And when Sheriff's play was first performed, they got this almost unknown young actor, 21-year-old, to play the lead part, and that was Laurence Olivier. So they'd worked together before, and Olivier is often seen as the most successful British stage and film actor and director, some people would say ever. And he is the driving force that gave us the National Theatre, which is one of our great treasures now. Now, as a child, Laurence Olivier didn't see much of his father, who was a clergyman who didn't have a living, and he kept on sort of disappearing to spend 6 months covering somebody who was ill or away and that sort of thing. But he was very close to his mother, who's Agnes Louise Crookenden. And being one of the volunteer researchers here, I was sort of tricked up at the word Crookenden because it's a very rare surname. You can tell from the sound of it that it must have originated in the Weald, which is that highly wooded bit of hills that stretch across South Kent and then into Sussex and Surrey a little bit. It's very rare. There's less than 90 people have that surname now, and in 1881 there were only 44 people in the whole of the United Kingdom with that surname. So we thought, that might be interesting to follow that through and see where we go. I said earlier, I think that the researchers are asked to do things, but we also generate our own interests, and we try and understand the importance of the dockyard and how it worked and how it fitted in with the communities. So this led me to look at Agnes Crookenden and her ancestors. So her grandfather was a chap called Adolphus Pelham Crookenden, which is a lovely handful. He was a joiner and a builder, a surveyor's clerk, and he'd been born in 1800 at Arundel, where his grandfather leased a private shipyard from a duke, and he used that to build warships for the Royal Navy during the period when Nelson was active in the wars against France. Adolphus's father, Isaac Crookenden, he loved writing, he loved reading, he was an assistant schoolmaster. He fell in love, and he wanted to get married, but his wife and her family said, no, you can't marry. He's only earning tuppence halfpenny a year, or something ridiculous as an assistant schoolmaster. So he thought, what's really popular at the moment are these Gothic stories. And he turned out tiny little stories, 10, 20 pages, and sold them very, very cheaply. And they were very racy Gothic romances. They became enormously popular, and his income went up and he could get married, and then along came Adolphus Pelham Crookenden and so on. Isaac's father is a chap called Caleb Crookenden. He's at the link of this story that I'm leading up to. He'd been born here in Chatham in 1730. His father, John Crookenden, he'd been a shipwright at Sheerness and at Chatham. He'd been born on the Isle of Sheppey. And then he'd been a ship's carpenter. This is John Crookenden. He'd been a ship's carpenter on board several warships, the Diligence, the Dartmouth, the Tilbury, the Tiger. And that's always an interesting part of the stories that we find, is these links where people have done work in the dockyard and then work in the Navy, and then they come back to the dockyard. And they go back to different dockyards and things. That's what Caleb was brought up with, his father doing that. And then at the age of 15, he was apprenticed to a shipwright, John Chambers, here in the dockyard. We've got the records. There's detail there about that. And so after 7 years of living with his apprentice master, who was then responsible for training him, educating him about life generally, feeding him, dressing him, So after 7 years of this, he was assessed as being a fully qualified shipwright, and he becomes called a master shipwright because he is able to do work completely unsupervised and generate work. Then a couple of years after that, in 1754, he got married at St Mary's Church just down the road, in Dock Road here, outside the Dockyard, to Mary Pelham, which is where Adolphus Pelham Crookenden got his middle name. And 3 years later, 1757, he's taking on apprentices. So he's being qualified at that stage, 5 years, and his reputation is good. So the Dockyard approved that he takes on an apprentice. 2 years later, in 1759, along with all the other shipwrights in the Dockyard, they'd have been involved, just a few yards from where we're sitting, in laying down the keel of HMS Victory. So the ship that his descendant Laurence Olivier would use in this great film that we've been talking about. So his direct ancestor, Caleb Crookenden, is one of the master shipwrights who was in the team that worked to build it. And during the time that Caleb was here, the Victory was launched. It took 6 years to build because they did it at a pace that would allow these ships to season more naturally and so on. Caleb Crookenden, down at West Itchenor, he built warships, 2-deck warships, and when the business folded at the end of the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, when they came to an end, and among the things in the catalogue for when his goods were sold were the moulds that were used to shape the sides of a ship and so on. And here in the Dockyard, you can go to the Mold Loft where these things would have been laid out on the floor and used in the shaping of the most basic and essential timbers in the warships were built here. And so it's a lovely story that goes from this wondrous model, which you can see fighting battles in the film, and the star of that thing, Laurence Olivier, who plays Nelson, who lost his life in the greatest victory that this country had in naval matters at the Battle of Trafalgar. Laurence Olivier is descended from one of the best shipwrights among the team here in Chatham Dockyard, who built that warship, the HMS Victory, which is synonymous with Nelson and synonymous with the history of the Navy.
You can access our podcast via the Podbean website or download their free apps from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the subscribe button and you will be sent a notification whenever a new episode is added. To contact us about podcast, please email us at podcast@chdt.org.uk. That's podcast@chdt.org.uk. So until the next time, this is John saying goodbye and take care.